Rose stood by the bedroom window, silently watching the rain as it tapped gently against the glass. The house was quiet, too quiet for a Friday evening. Alex was in the living room, slouched on the couch in the same faded sweatshirt he'd worn all week, eyes glued to a muted news broadcast, barely reacting to anything. It had been 3 months since he lost his job, and the weight of unemployment hung heavily over their once vibrant home. Rose had been carrying the household alone, juggling bills, groceries, mortgage payments, and still showing up each morning at Miles and Cole like everything was fine. The truth was, nothing was. But she didn't complain. Instead, she packed him lunch every morning, left sticky notes with reminders to apply for jobs, and made sure the Wi-Fi was always paid up so he could keep searching. She didn't have the luxury of breaking down. He needed her strong. That evening, she walked into the living room with a gentle smile, holding a plate of his favorite meal, spaghetti bolognese, with garlic bread on the side. "I figured you hadn't eaten," she said softly, placing it in front of him. Alex barely looked up. "Thanks," he muttered, more out of habit than gratitude. Rose sat beside him and tried to engage him in conversation, asking how the job applications were going, if he needed help with anything, but Alex responded with short, clipped answers. His pride was wounded, and though she understood, it didn't make it hurt any less. That night, when he went to bed without touching the food, Rose sat at the kitchen table alone, her hands cupping her face. She whispered to herself, "It's just a phase. We'll get through this. I just need to be patient." She didn't know it yet, but this wasn't the beginning of a difficult season. It was the first crack in a foundation she had built on loyalty and love. And even as it began to crumble beneath her, Rose chose to carry the weight, because when you love someone, you don't just fight for them. Sometimes, you carry them until they can stand again. The alarm buzzed at 5 a.m., slicing through the darkness like a blade. Rose reached out and silenced it before it could wake Alex, who hadn't fallen asleep until nearly 3 a.m. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, gathering herself before standing to begin another day of quiet endurance. In the bathroom, she stared at her reflection, tired eyes, makeup barely concealing the exhaustion etched into her face. By 6:30 a.m., she was dressed in a navy pantsuit, heels in one hand, coffee in the other, and car keys dangling from her finger. Before leaving, she placed a handwritten note beside Alex's phone. "Don't forget to follow up on the logistics role today. Love you." She never mentioned how overdue their utility bill was or how she'd just maxed out her credit card paying for his prescription refill. At work, she handled 2 project crises back-to-back, filled in for her absent supervisor, and still found time to mentor an intern. "You're amazing, Rose," one of her team members said admiringly during a strategy session. She smiled. "We don't get awards for holding the world together. We just do it." At lunch, she stepped into an empty stairwell and opened her banking app. The screen blinked red. Overdraft. Again. She quickly logged out before the anxiety could take root. That evening, she returned home to find Alex still on the couch, television flickering, a bowl of cereal by his side. "Did you get a chance to call that recruiter today?" she asked gently, removing her heels and rubbing her sore feet. He shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "Didn't feel up to it." Rose bit the inside of her cheek. "Okay," she said softly, walking past him into the kitchen where she opened a cabinet and stared blankly at the near-empty shelves. She began boiling rice, just enough for 2, and turned the volume up on the kitchen radio to drown out the lump building in her throat. When she sat beside him later, offering a plate, she added, "You're going to land something soon. I know it. Just don't give up, Alex." He nodded without looking at her. Rose leaned her head against the cushion, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long she could stretch her paycheck before their lives came crashing down. It was their anniversary, 7 years of marriage. Rose had circled the date on the calendar in red ink a month ago. She had reserved a quiet corner table at Carmela's, the Italian restaurant where they'd celebrated their 3rd year with laughter and promises. She even left the office early to pick up a small gift, a silver watch Alex once admired but claimed was too expensive. It wasn't cheap, but she had put it on a payment plan, hoping the gesture would bring back the man who used to surprise her with roadside flowers and handwritten notes. She changed into a soft burgundy dress, did her makeup, and waited by the window at 7 p.m. By 8:45 p.m., she was still alone. Her phone buzzed with a text, "Not in the mood to go out. Maybe next time." That was all. No happy anniversary, no apology. Just silence wrapped in cold indifference. She stared at the message for a long time before slowly removing her earrings. Her reflection in the mirror looked like a woman clinging to something that didn't want to be held. She didn't cry. Instead, she lit a candle, served herself dinner alone at the table she had set for two, and placed the untouched watch box beside the empty seat. She whispered a toast to herself, to loving someone enough to carry both their dreams and disappointments. Later that night, when Alex finally emerged from the bedroom, Rose was curled on the sofa with her laptop. "You didn't have to make a big deal out of today," he said, sitting across from her, avoiding eye contact. "I didn't ask you to." She looked up, her eyes tired but calm. "You didn't have to ask. I just thought you'd remember." He gave no response, only a blank stare as he reached for the remote and changed the channel. In that moment, something quiet inside her shifted. Not out of anger, but a growing realization that the man she had fought so hard to protect might already be gone. The hardest part wasn't his absence from the restaurant. It was the way he could be right in front of her and still feel so far away. The following Saturday, Rose sat at the dining table, her laptop open, as she reviewed yet another version of Alex's resume. She had rewritten it twice already that week, tailoring each version to specific job roles. Logistics manager, operations coordinator, even procurement officer. She cross-checked LinkedIn listings while sipping cold coffee and highlighting keywords. "Alex, can you come take a look at this?" she called out. He walked in slowly, phone in hand, scrolling. "What now?" he asked. "I adjusted your summary to focus on problem solving and leadership, and I restructured your employment history so it highlights your core strengths." He leaned over the screen briefly. "Looks fine," he muttered before walking off again. Rose blinked hard to stop the sting behind her eyes. Her colleague Madison had said just yesterday, "You're carrying a grown man's future on your back, Rose." "Who's carrying you?" But Rose had just smiled and replied, "He just needs a break." "I'd want someone to believe in me too if the roles were reversed." That evening, she stayed up applying to 15 jobs on his behalf, even calling in a favor from an old recruiter friend at a shipping firm. "Rose, why aren't you sending these out for yourself?" "You're due for a promotion," her friend Miles asked. She forced a laugh. "Maybe later. He needs this more than I do." She didn't mention that her own boss had recommended her for a team lead position, but she declined it, so she could prioritize getting Alex into a stable role first. Every sacrifice she made with love. And still, when she passed Alex the list of applications the next morning, he barely skimmed it. "Cool," he said. "I'll check later." Rose gave a small nod and headed for work. In the cab, she sat in silence as the buildings sped past her, wondering if the effort she was pouring out of her soul had a home to land in, or if it would just keep dissolving into someone who stopped noticing the hands that kept him from drowning. The silence in the room was deafening as Alex read yet another rejection email. He slammed the laptop shut and stood abruptly. "This is pointless," he muttered, pacing the room. Rose looked up from her own work documents, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's not pointless. You've applied to some strong positions. You just need to keep going," he scoffed. "They don't even respond anymore. Maybe I'm not cut out for this." She watched him carefully, weighing her words. "Then maybe we find a different route. What if I talk to someone at my office?" His head snapped toward her. "What, so you want me to work where everyone knows I'm your charity case?" Rose paused. "No, I want you to have a shot. That's all." The tension hung thick between them. He walked out without responding. Rose sat still, a dull ache growing behind her eyes. Every door they knocked on was shut, but it was the cold between them that made it all harder. Later that night, Rose sat in her home office, eyes scanning through internal job listings at Miles & Cole. She wasn't supposed to, but she knew which departments were struggling and where gaps could be discreetly filled. There was an opening being discussed in the logistics coordination unit, temporary, but with growth potential. She drafted an internal note to the HR lead, Nancy, writing, "Hypothetically, If I know someone highly capable, but with an unconventional background, could we consider a referral for this slot? After hitting send, she leaned back and exhaled slowly. It wasn't easy. There would be questions, whispers. But Rose didn't care. She was tired of watching Alex spiral. The next morning, Nancy called her. If this candidate is who I think it is, Rose, there'll be resistance. But I'll set up a preliminary talk with operations. You'll have to back him hard. Rose nodded into the phone, her voice resolute. I will. She walked out of the house that morning with one goal in mind. If the world wouldn't open a door for Alex, she would pry one open with her own hands, even if it meant risking the balance she had spent years building at the company. Rose stood in the corner of the operations conference room, arms crossed tightly as the discussion continued around her. We're already over capacity in logistics, Director Paul Adiconal pointed out. I don't see how we can justify adding a new hire without compromising the quarterly budget. Rose took a step forward. What if I absorb the cost into my department's resource line? I'll hold off on hiring a second analyst this quarter. That buys us the room we need. Paul looked skeptical. You'd do that? For a candidate without corporate logistics experience? Rose met his eyes. Yes, because he learns fast, he's disciplined, and I trust him. Paul gave a slow nod. I'll set up a pre-screening with HR, but the board will need a written justification. And Rose, your name's going to be on that file. This falls apart, it falls on you. She nodded. I understand. The moment she left the room, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, releasing a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her credibility at Miles & Cole was her most valuable currency, and she'd just gambled all of it on her husband. That evening, as they sat on opposite sides of the living room, Rose cleared her throat. There's a position opening up at my company, logistics coordination. It's entry-level but internal. I've put in a word. Alex looked up slowly, frowning. You spoke to them for me. She nodded. Yes. You'll need to meet with HR and probably do a technical assessment, but I think you'll do well. He stared at her for a long moment before shrugging. I don't know if I want to work where you're queen bee. It'll look like I'm riding your name. Her heart dipped, but she forced a smile. Then prove that you're not. Show them you belong. After a beat, he said, Fine. I'll do it, but don't expect me to play your puppet. Rose turned her face away to hide the hurt that flashed across her expression. All she had done was open a door. How it was walked through, that part was never hers to control. The day Alex stepped into Miles & Cole as a new hire, he carried a clipboard, fresh ID badge, and a look that wavered between excitement and suspicion. Rose walked a few steps behind him, wanting to avoid attention, but needing to ensure everything went smoothly. HR had placed him under team supervisor Madison Ease, a capable but no-nonsense manager who had been briefed on the special circumstances. So, this is Mr. Madison, Madison said, extending a hand. I expect punctuality, accuracy, and initiative. And don't expect favors. We don't hand out wins here. Alex shook her hand, nodding. Understood. From the sidelines, Rose watched closely, offering a subtle thumbs-up when their eyes met. He didn't return the gesture. That afternoon, she slipped into his training session briefly and passed him a handwritten guide she had compiled, workflows, internal acronyms, and quick reference tips. You'll need this, she whispered. He barely glanced at it. Thanks, he said curtly. I've got it handled. Back in her own office, Rose overheard two junior associates whispering outside her door. Isn't that her husband? One asked. She must have pulled some serious strings. The words stung, but she pushed them aside. She had expected the scrutiny. She buried herself in budget revisions and team assessments, trying not to track Alex's progress too closely. But at night, she asked him gently, How was your first day? He gave a small shrug. Fine, they're decent. Gladys is cool. Rose's stomach tightened slightly. Gladys? She asked. Yeah, Benson from Corporate Strategy. We worked on a cross-departmental file this afternoon. She said I had potential. Rose smiled faintly, masking the unease growing inside her. She knew Gladys, smart, charming, and dangerously manipulative. But she said nothing. After all, Alex was finally employed. She didn't want to seem insecure. So instead of voicing her concerns, she walked into the kitchen to clean the dishes, whispering under her breath, Let him prove himself. Just let him rise. The quarterly strategy retreat was approaching, and Rose had been preparing a proposal that could redefine their supply chain model, a presentation that was meant to be her stepping stone to a directorial seat. But when she saw Alex's name added to the delegate list and realized he hadn't been included in any meaningful department-wide initiatives yet, she made a quiet decision. That night, after the senior management meeting, she approached Director Paul Adiconal. "Paul," she said cautiously, "about the international distribution pilot, I think Alex could handle it." Paul raised an eyebrow. "You've been grooming that model for months. It's your ticket to strategy council." Rose nodded. "I know, but I'll work behind the scenes with him. Let him present it. He needs a stage. He's capable." Paul studied her for a long second before replying, "Fine. But if it flops, you both wear it." She nodded, hiding the knot in her throat. At home, she handed Alex the proposal. "This was supposed to be mine," she admitted. "But I think you're ready." He stared at the documents, then looked at her. "Why would you give this up?" She smiled faintly. "Because sometimes giving someone a win is the only way they'll remember how to fight." In the following weeks, Rose spent late nights coaching Alex on terminology, numbers, and anticipated objections. She compiled case studies, updated spreadsheets, and walked him through simulations, all behind closed doors. On the day of the retreat, Alex stood before a room of executives and delivered a crisp, compelling presentation. The applause was loud, and the compliments poured in. "That new guy, he's sharp," one exec murmured. "Definitely rising fast." No one mentioned Rose. No one knew she had written half his lines and answered every tough question he might face. In a hallway conversation afterward, she heard Gladys say to another VP, "I always knew he had potential. Some people just need the right spotlight." Rose felt the words strike her like stones, but she kept walking. That night at home, Alex poured himself a drink and laughed. "I think they really liked me. One guy even asked if I was related to the CEO. Can you imagine?" Rose nodded with a tight smile. She didn't ask if he mentioned her name during the celebration. Deep down, she already knew the answer. The next morning, the company newsletter went out, and the headline on page 2 read, "New Talent Shines at Strategy Summit." Alex's photo appeared below it, shaking hands with a senior executive. The article described him as a fresh voice in logistics and credited his initiative with reinvigorating the international rollout. Rose read every word slowly, her expression unreadable. There was no mention of her role, not even a footnote. Madison passed by her desk and quipped, "Looks like your husband's the new star. You better watch out, Rose." She smiled politely, but her heart sank. Later that afternoon, during a staff briefing, Paul Adiconal praised the project's success and said, "Alex Madison has demonstrated extraordinary initiative. That's the kind of innovation we need at this level." Alex, seated a few rows behind Rose, didn't look in her direction once. Rose stared at the folder in her hand and asked herself for the first time, had she created a competitor instead of a partner? That evening at home, Alex walked into the kitchen as Rose stirred soup on the stove. "They've invited me to sit in on the regional planning committee next month," he said, casually checking his phone. "I think it's a big deal." Rose turned slightly. "That's great. I'm proud of you." He leaned against the counter. Gladys said I reminded her of her early days. She thinks I've got leadership potential. The name made Rose's hand tighten around the spoon. "Gladys seems very invested in your progress." Alex chuckled. "She gets it. She's sharp. You two could learn a thing or two from each other." The words hit like ice. Rose didn't reply. Instead, she turned off the heat and ladled soup into a bowl. "Dinner's ready," she said quietly. As they ate in silence, Rose looked across the table at the man she had built a ladder for. She had once imagined standing at the top of the company hand in hand with him. But now, watching the growing confidence in his voice and the absence of any gratitude in his eyes, she began to wonder if he'd climbed that ladder only to forget who steadied it for him. Gladys Benson leaned against the railing of the executive balcony with a glass of white wine in hand, watching the sun dip over the skyline. Her lips curled into a knowing smile as she spotted Alex approaching. "I hear you're the golden boy now," she said with a playful smirk. Alex laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I wouldn't go that far. I just got lucky, I guess. Gladys tilted her head. Luck? Or timing? She stepped closer, her voice softer. You're doing well, really well. But let me give you a piece of advice. Don't let anyone shrink your light just because they think they made you. Alex paused. What do you mean? She smiled. You've got something. Don't get stuck in anyone's shadow. Not even Rose's. Her tone was gentle, but laced with a deliberate undertone. Alex nodded slowly. Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing lately. From behind the tinted windows of the boardroom, Rose watched the interaction, unreadable. She could see the shift happening, but she wasn't sure if she was witnessing the birth of ambition or the beginning of betrayal. The next day, during a staff-wide brainstorming session, Gladys openly praised Alex's latest logistics model. It's refreshing to see fresh ideas without the usual filters, she said, her eyes briefly sliding toward Rose. The room laughed. Rose smiled faintly, choosing silence over conflict. Later, in the restroom, she found Gladys reapplying her lipstick. You're doing a great job mentoring Alex, Gladys said, her voice syrupy sweet. He's lucky to have someone as generous as you. Rose met her gaze in the mirror. I believe in building people up, Gladys. Not using them, Gladys chuckled. Oh, we all build. The difference is some of us don't expect the credit. She walked out, leaving a trail of perfume and provocation. Alone in the mirror, Rose took a long breath. She wasn't naive. She saw the way Gladys hovered, the way Alex now smiled more at his phone than at her. But she also knew that the game being played wasn't about love. It was about power. And as the pieces moved, Rose was slowly realizing she had sacrificed her crown to someone who didn't know how to wear it, while a silent rival waited to claim it for herself. The day began with chaos in the warehouse division. A supply chain issue had delayed a major shipment, and tensions flared in the boardroom. Rose was late to the crisis meeting. She had just returned from a field inspection. By the time she entered, Alex was already halfway through suggesting an alternative vendor flow. His tone was assertive, his body language confident. If we reroute through the Ibadan hub and partner with Thompson Haulage, we can reduce the lag by 48 hours, he said. Gladys, seated to his left, leaned forward and smiled. Brilliant. That's the kind of thinking we need more of. A few heads nodded. Rose slid into her chair quietly, watching the subtle exchange. She contributed to the discussion with precision, but the energy had already shifted. Later, as they exited the meeting, she heard Gladys say, You were the only one in that room not panicking. Alex grinned. Thanks, I just wanted to help. You did more than help, Gladys replied. You led. Back at his desk, Alex found a handwritten note from Gladys tucked under his file tray. People notice leadership. Don't dim that. He read it twice. When Rose passed by during her lunch break, she paused. Good job today, she said warmly. That suggestion was solid. He nodded, but didn't look up from his computer. Gladys said the same thing. The casual mention stung more than she cared to admit. That evening, as Rose worked from the dining table, compiling quarterly performance metrics, Alex sat across from her, scrolling through his phone. She tried to make conversation. I was thinking we should do a weekend getaway next month. Just us. He blinked, then shrugged. We'll see. Might be busy. Rose looked down at her screen, heart sinking. The disconnect was no longer subtle. It was growing roots. While she focused on building bridges between departments, it seemed someone else was slowly building one between her husband and herself, and she was watching it happen in real time. Alex sat across from Gladys in a quiet corner of the break room, their laptops open but long forgotten. I feel like I'm finally being seen here, he confessed. Like I'm not just some guy who lucked into the building. Gladys sipped her green tea and nodded. You're not. You're exactly what this place needs, a fresh mind, not bogged down by old ways of thinking. She leaned in slightly. Even Rose, for all her brilliance, sometimes forgets what it means to take risks. She plays it safe. Alex hesitated. She's been through a lot. She's just careful. Gladys tilted her head. Or maybe she's just afraid someone might outshine her. Her voice was soft, coaxing. Don't let anyone box you in with their history. You've got a future of your own. Alex looked away, unsure of what unsettled him more, her words, or how much they resonated. That night, Alex and Rose sat together in the living room, the television playing faintly in the background. Rose turned to him with a hopeful smile. "You've been doing so well lately. I hope you know how proud I am of you." Alex looked at her, almost distracted. "Yeah, thanks." She touched his hand. "I mean it, and if you ever want to lead a proposal or pitch your own model, just tell me. I'll support you." He nodded slowly, then pulled his hand away to check a message. Rose recognized the notification layout. It was a workplace message app. Likely from Gladys. The sinking feeling in her chest deepened. She looked at him and asked gently, "Is something going on between you two?" He blinked. "What? No, we just work together." "That's it." She nodded, but the silence afterward was dense with unspoken truths. Rose didn't push further. But inside, a quiet ache was beginning to take permanent shape, because the words that used to build her husband up were now being whispered by someone who didn't know how much she had already sacrificed for him to stand this tall. The next morning, Alex left early without saying goodbye, a departure that was becoming more frequent. At work, Rose passed by a small group huddled around the break room. She caught the end of a joke, Alex mimicking her presentation style in a light mockery. Then she says, "Let's revisit the Q2 alignment structure, like she's reading from a manual." Laughter followed. Even Gladys chuckled. Rose stood at the door, unseen for a moment. When Alex finally spotted her, his expression faltered. "We were just joking, team bonding, nothing serious," he said quickly. Rose smiled tightly. "Of course. Keep bonding." She turned and walked away without another word. But that laugh, Gladys's laugh, followed her down the hallway. That afternoon, Alex received a team assignment email. He glanced at it and frowned. Another operations template? Rose must have made that decision. Later, he barged into her office without knocking. "You're still treating me like an intern." Rose looked up, confused. "I gave you the ops template because your last one was brilliant." "Why would you think otherwise?" His voice was sharp. "Because it always feels like you're managing me, not trusting me." Rose stood, hurt flickering across her face. "Alex, I've supported you every step of the way. Do you know how much I've risked for you in this company?" He crossed his arms. "Yeah. Then why does it still feel like I'm stuck under your shadow? Maybe Gladys is right. You don't want to see me grow beyond you." The room fell silent. Rose took a step back, stunned. "Gladys said that?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, realizing too late what he'd revealed. She was just making a point, and maybe she's not wrong. Rose's eyes burned, but her voice remained steady. "You know what's funny, Alex? You used to dream out loud to me. Now you just echo someone else's opinion." He stormed out, leaving her alone in the office, staring at the door that just slammed shut. And for the first time since she brought him into her world, Rose wondered if she had welcomed not just a husband into her company, but an opponent into her peace. Accountability. Percy leaned back in his chair, sipping his lukewarm coffee with a knowing smirk. "Word around the floor is you're climbing fast," he said. "You and Gladys, that's a power combo." Alex chuckled uncomfortably. "We work well together, I guess." Percy raised an eyebrow. "You guess? Come on, man. Don't be modest. You've got more momentum now than most guys who've been here 5 years. And to be honest, it's about time someone stopped living in Rose's shadow." Alex shifted. "It's not like that." But Percy leaned in, his tone shifting to something more persuasive. "Isn't it, though? She brought you here, yeah. But now she acts like she owns your progress. Gladys sees your potential. Rose, she's too busy protecting her position to let you rise beside her." Those words hit like nails, sharp, deliberate, and calculated to wound. That evening, Alex sat at his desk, turning Percy's words over in his mind. There had always been an unspoken pressure between him and Rose at work, a subtle undertone that made him feel like he owed every success to her grace. He didn't want to feel indebted forever. At home, Rose was in the kitchen prepping dinner when he walked in and said bluntly, "Do you think you intimidate me?" She paused, knife hovering midair. "What?" Percy said something today. "That maybe I've been too focused on catching up to you instead of building something of my own." Rose wiped her hands and turned to him, confused and hurt. "Percy, since when does Percy know our story?" Alex shrugged. "He sees things. Maybe he's not wrong." Rose stepped closer. "I never wanted you to catch up to me. I wanted us to rise together." But if you're letting people who've never stepped into our marriage rewrite what we are, then maybe I'm not the one holding you back." She turned away, blinking rapidly. He said nothing more. And in that silence, a new distance carved itself into the space between them, one that wouldn't be bridged by titles or promotions. Rose awoke at 2:13 a.m. to find Alex's side of the bed empty again. This was becoming routine. He often claimed late project meetings or departmental dinners, but his clothes didn't carry the smell of the office anymore. That night she wandered into the kitchen and found a half-eaten slice of pizza on the counter and a faint trail of perfume lingering in the air, not hers. She stood still for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the ache of her own thoughts. When Alex returned at 2:57 a.m., he didn't see her sitting in the dark. "You're home late," she said softly. He flinched. "Didn't realize you were up. I was with Percy. And Gladys. She invited a few people over after work." Rose stood, her voice composed. "Was it worth it?" He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She shook her head. "Nothing. Go sleep." He walked past her, silent, and she stared at the empty doorway long after he was gone. The next morning, Rose tried to act normal. She served breakfast. She smiled through the silence. But her hands trembled slightly when she poured his coffee. Alex was on his phone again, chuckling quietly. She glanced at the screen, Gladys's name in the notification banner. Her throat tightened. "What are you two working on that requires 3 a.m. texts and perfume trails?" she asked, voice low. Alex looked up, surprised. "Are you spying on me now?" She shook her head. "No, I'm asking because I still wear this ring, and I'm trying to decide if it still means anything to you." He exhaled sharply, shoving the phone in his pocket. "You always want to turn everything into a war. Maybe I just enjoy spending time with someone who respects me." That was the wound she didn't expect. She turned away, blinking back tears. "Then maybe you should go spend all your time there." He left without another word, the front door slamming behind him. And in the stillness that followed, Rose realized that the nights they once curled up laughing in each other's arms had vanished, and what remained was a bed too cold and a silence too loud. Rose stepped into the executive restroom after a back-to-back series of meetings, her head pounding. She was reapplying lipstick in front of the mirror when Gladys entered, heels clicking confidently against the tiles. "Rough day?" she asked with faux sympathy. Rose didn't look at her. "Just full," she replied. "A lot on my desk." Gladys washed her hands slowly, then leaned on the sink. "Funny. I would have thought someone like you would be used to pressure by now. But I guess it's different when you're not the one being spotlighted anymore." Rose met her eyes in the mirror. "If you have something to say, say it." Gladys smirked. "Just that power doesn't always stay where it starts. Timing is everything. You've had your moment. Maybe it's time someone else took the lead. Someone less rigid." There was venom beneath the smile, a clear declaration. Rose turned to her, calm but direct. "Are you talking about the company or my husband?" Gladys chuckled softly. "Darling, sometimes they're the same thing." Rose stepped closer, her voice firm. "I see what you're doing. You've always wanted my seat. But don't mistake my silence for weakness." Gladys leaned in, her tone colder now. "And don't mistake my smile for innocence. People don't care who built the ship, Rose. They care who sails it better." With that, she exited, leaving a chill behind her. Rose stood alone, watching her reflection as waves of nausea and realization washed over her. She had spent years building systems, teams, and bridges, but somehow she had missed the slow poison of rivalry weaving its way into her home and workplace. She walked back to her office with her shoulders squared, but her mind spiraling. Gladys wasn't just playing office politics. She was playing for everything, power, control, and her husband's loyalty. And the terrifying part was that she might already be winning. The house felt colder now, even though the weather hadn't changed. Rose walked in that evening and heard Alex's voice from the bedroom, low and animated. She paused in the hallway. "Yeah, I'll send it over tonight," he said, then chuckled softly. "No, you were right. That layout worked better." A pause. "Okay, talk soon." The call ended, and Rose waited before stepping in. "Hey," she said gently. Alex glanced up, barely surprised. "Hey." She set her bag down. "I was thinking, maybe we could take a weekend off. Leave the city. Just rest. He shifted uncomfortably. Now's not a good time. We're about to roll out that new client integration. She nodded, not pushing. I just thought we needed space. Together, I mean. He didn't answer. Instead, he picked up his laptop. I have to finish something for Gladys. Rose turned away, her heart slowly folding inward like a paper map left in the rain. The following nights only confirmed what Rose already felt. She was now a guest in her own marriage. Conversations were limited to logistics, bills, Wi-Fi, groceries. She avoided confrontation, hoping the silence would settle into something manageable. But it didn't. It festered. One evening, while sorting laundry, she found a white shirt tucked deep in Alex's gym bag, a faint smear of lipstick on the collar. Not hers. She held it in her hands for a long time before folding it neatly and placing it back. When Alex walked in, she looked up. "Do you love her?" He froze. "What?" "Gladys," she said plainly. "Are you in love with her?" His jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Rose nodded, brushing past him. "Then either I'm crazy, or I'm watching the man I married vanish into someone I don't recognize." He didn't stop her, and as she stood by the kitchen sink later, hands trembling under running water, she realized that home wasn't defined by walls. It was defined by who waited for you within them, and Alex wasn't waiting anymore. The next department heads meeting had an unusual item on the agenda: structural streamlining. "There's been a redundancy in some executive functions," Percy announced, his tone falsely neutral. "This is not a personnel attack, just strategy optimization." Rose frowned. "Redundancy? Based on what?" Percy gestured toward a projection slide. "We've identified overlaps between strategy planning and logistics coordination. The board is considering merging some functions." Rose folded her arms. "And which roles are being reviewed?" Percy didn't answer directly, but his glance at her said enough. Across the table, Gladys pretended to take notes, but a smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. After the meeting, Rose cornered Paul Adiconal. "Who pushed this motion?" He exhaled. There was lobbying behind the scenes. Percy submitted the review memo, and from what I've heard, Alex and Gladys supported it. The words stung sharper than she expected. "Alex," she repeated. Paul hesitated. "I thought you knew." That evening, Rose sat at her desk, lights-dimmed eyes fixed on the internal emails she had pulled from the system logs. The voting proposal had been circulating for a week. Her name was listed under Executive Impact. She hadn't even been consulted. And Alex, his signature was there, confirming support for the vote. She printed it out, stared at it, then folded the paper into quarters and slid it into her drawer. When Alex came home later, humming lightly, she didn't mention it. She simply asked, "How was work?" He shrugged. "Busy. Good." She nodded. "Anything I should know?" "Nope," he said, pouring himself a drink. "Same old." She watched him for a long moment. "Gladys must be proud," he smirked. "She's got vision, knows how to push things forward." Rose smiled faintly. "I bet she does." As he walked away, the glass in his hand, she stared at the empty hallway. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was calculated. And it wasn't just about a marriage anymore. It was about a position, a legacy. And the vote to erase her had already begun ticking. The boardroom was colder than usual the next morning. Rose arrived early, notes in hand, but the tension was already thick in the air. As each board member filtered in, few made eye contact with her. Alex sat across the table, flipping through a leather-bound notepad. Gladys entered moments later, whispering something into Percy's ear before taking her seat. Paul cleared his throat. "We're here to finalize the vote on structural realignment. All executive-level overlaps will be evaluated for strategic consolidation." Rose spoke, voice firm. "This is a deliberate move. You're pushing me out without even offering a dialogue." Percy responded, "You were included in the broader consultation." She shook her head. "I received no memo. No brief. This is ambush politics." Gladys folded her hands. "It's strategy, Rose. Not personal." Alex avoided her gaze. The vote proceeded. It was quick, clean, ruthless. When Paul announced the result, Rose's name was formally listed for executive phase-out, effective within the week. She rose from her seat, spine straight. "Thank you," she said, her voice even, "for showing me what this place has become." Her eyes swept the room, stopping at Alex. "Especially you." He looked down at his notepad, jaw tight. She walked out without slamming the door, her heels clicking with controlled dignity. In her office, she closed the door behind her and sat down, staring at the framed photo on her desk. Her and Alex on the day she received her first executive award. She placed it face down, then opened her drawer and retrieved the folded email with his signature on the vote. The confirmation, the betrayal. She didn't cry, she didn't rage. Instead, she opened a blank notepad, titled it Next Steps, and wrote the first line, "Survive quietly, then rise without a sound." The chair had been pulled from under her, but she wasn't falling. She was preparing to stand on something higher. Rose walked into her office for what she knew might be the final time. The blinds were half drawn, dust danced in the sunlight, and her chair still held the imprint of the long hours she had spent trying to keep the company moving forward. She had arrived earlier than usual, not out of habit, but because she wanted to say goodbye to the space that had once given her purpose. Carefully, she opened each drawer, pulling out her notes, client files, personal trinkets. A mug from her first intern, a framed card from a former team, thanking her for her leadership. With every item packed, a memory whispered. As she folded a scarf that had hung over her chair for 2 years, the door creaked open. It was Paul. "I just wanted to say, I didn't vote against you," he said, voice low. "But I didn't fight for you either, and I'm sorry for that." Rose gave a small nod. "Don't apologize, Paul. This place doesn't reward resistance." By mid-morning, the news had circulated. Rose Madison was stepping down. Some whispered it was her decision. Others speculated it had been forced. No one knew for sure. She had made no public statement. When she passed the main floor with her box in hand, a few colleagues stood, others avoided her gaze. Alex wasn't at his desk. She didn't expect him to be. As she reached the elevator, she ran into Madison Ease, her old colleague. "Rose," Madison began, "you didn't deserve this." "Everyone knows it." Rose smiled faintly. "Deserve has little to do with survival." As the elevator doors closed, she took one last look at the place she had poured a decade of her life into. She didn't cry, she didn't tremble. But something inside her went quiet, as if a fire had been doused, only to be banked into something even stronger. She stepped out of the building into the crisp afternoon sun, lifted her chin, and walked away, not as someone who had been defeated, but as someone who had simply turned the page. By the end of the week, the company was buzzing with speculation. Whispers traveled faster than memos. In the break room, 2 interns exchanged theories. "I heard she was difficult to work with," one said. "No, someone told me she was underperforming," the other replied. The truth didn't matter. What mattered was the story that stuck. Percy, ever the quiet manipulator, casually mentioned in passing that realignment was necessary, and Rose had lost touch with emerging trends. Gladys, when asked, gave a pitiful smile and said, "I respect Rose deeply. Change is hard for everyone." But behind closed doors, she was already rearranging departments to absorb Rose's former division. She even rebranded one of Rose's project models as the Benson Framework, taking full credit in an executive strategy call. No one corrected her, and Alex, he walked the halls with new confidence, shaking hands, fielding calls, soaking in the recognition that now trailed him like perfume. Meanwhile, Rose kept a calculated silence. She didn't defend herself publicly. She didn't respond to the comments or try to undo the rumors. She simply let the tide carry the noise. She spent her days away from the company, catching up on neglected hobbies, sipping tea while drafting business notes in her garden, and meeting with a few trusted former colleagues behind the scenes. Some reached out in disbelief. Others asked what her next move would be. "You'll see soon enough," she would reply with a calm smile. But behind that calm was precision. She knew how power worked and how it shifted. So she watched and waited, gathering what she needed without warning anyone. And all the while, inside the halls of Miles and Cole, they laughed, gossiped, and praised themselves, unaware that the silence they mistook for surrender was the very weapon that would undo them. One evening, as Rose sat on her patio reviewing her personal archive of client contacts and strategy drafts, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Michael Danvers. Can we talk?" Her heart stilled for a moment. Michael Danvers, the CEO himself. She replied simply, "When?" 10 minutes later, her phone rang. His voice was measured, calm. I apologize for how things were handled. I thought you should hear from me directly. Rose didn't interrupt. He continued, You've always been one of the few people in this company who got results without stepping on people to get there. We need that integrity now more than ever. She inhaled slowly. You do realize I was pushed out by people you promoted. Michael didn't flinch. I'm correcting that now. I want you back, not in your old position, higher. I've created a new role, Chief of Corporate Integrity and Strategic Expansion. You'll answer only to me, no board oversight. Rose was silent for a moment. Then why me? Because you were never just an employee, he said. You were the spine, and I need a spine now. Rose closed her laptop and stood, walking slowly to the edge of the balcony. The wind moved through her hair as she processed his words. I'll do it, she said finally, but on one condition. Michael waited. Let them believe they've won. Don't announce me. Don't brief them. I want to return through a different door, one they won't see coming. There was a beat of silence. Then he said, Agreed. As the call ended, Rose turned back toward the house with new fire in her chest. The crown she had been robbed of wasn't gone. It was just being reforged, quietly, beyond the eyes of those who thought they had buried her. And when she returned, it wouldn't be with an apology. It would be with power they wouldn't be prepared to bow to. Rose returned to the building through the underground executive parking lot, far from the bustling main lobby where most staff entered. She now had a private access badge, coded specifically by Michael himself, granting her entry to a wing reserved for senior corporate officers. Her new office, located 2 doors down from his, was sleek and quiet, intentionally stripped of the noise and ego of upper-level management. She settled into the leather chair, glancing at the frosted nameplate on her door. Chief of Corporate Integrity and Strategic Expansion. It wasn't public knowledge yet. Her appointment hadn't been emailed. No company-wide memo announced it. And that was exactly how she wanted it. For now, the office was her observation tower. She requested internal audits, reviewed departmental realignments, and quietly flagged conflicts of interest, especially those linked to Gladys and Percy. She moved like a shadow, present but unseen. One morning, while reviewing departmental approvals, she paused at a familiar signature. Alex. He had greenlit a merger pitch riddled with inconsistencies and missing disclosures. She shook her head, made a note, and pushed the file into her flagged tray. Later, she stepped into Michael's office to brief him. They're becoming sloppy, she said. Pride does that, he replied, signing a folder. Keep letting them believe you're gone. She nodded. Meanwhile, in the rest of the building, conversations about Rose had died down. People assumed she had moved on or left the city. Her name was no longer on anyone's tongue, but her hands were now on every critical file. She restructured reporting lines, tightened protocol, and rerouted approvals, all while sitting behind a door they didn't know existed. From her quiet corner of power, she watched the cracks widen. She had been erased from the spotlight, but not from the structure. And in the company they thought she'd left, she was already reshaping their future, one document at a time. It was a Friday evening when Gladys hosted a celebratory mixer at a rooftop lounge, marking her recent takeover of the Strategic Planning Division. Dressed in a sleek emerald dress and holding a glass of champagne, she made toasts to growth, renewal, and strong leadership. Alex stood beside her, laughing along, his arm casually brushing hers as they shared private jokes. Percy arrived late but was greeted like a VIP. To new beginnings, he declared, raising his drink. The group clinked glasses. Beneath the laughter and glamour, no one noticed the faint tremor in Alex's smile when someone asked, "Whatever happened to Rose?" He deflected with a half-joke. "Maybe she's writing a book." They all laughed. The night was golden for them. But far away from the rooftop, in a quiet executive wing, Rose sat reviewing final revisions of an internal audit report marked confidential. It exposed mismanagement in vendor contracts, data conflicts in the recent merger plan, and multiple violations, each document signed off by Percy, Gladys, and yes, Alex. Meanwhile, back at the party, Gladys leaned close to Alex. "You've been incredible these past few months," she said, voice silky. "You know, if we keep this up, there's no limit to how far we'll go." Alex smiled but didn't respond. He was enjoying the attention, the access, the sense of arrival. What he didn't realize was how vulnerable he had become. Every move he made was now traceable. Every signature, every approval, every shortcut, Rose had access to it all. And she was building something far more potent than revenge. She was building a case, one that wouldn't explode with drama, but with quiet devastation. While they toasted each other in the glow of false victory, Rose calmly placed a final sticky tab on a flagged contract and whispered to herself, "You wanted power without process. Now you'll feel what real power does in silence." Monday morning dawned like any other, but for Alex, it was pivotal. He walked into the CEO's office with Gladys, prepared to finalize a high-level merger pitch. "This will be our biggest move yet," she whispered, straightening his tie. "Let's dazzle him." But when the door opened, they both stopped mid-step. Behind the CEO's desk sat Rose, dressed in a charcoal suit, poised and silent, reviewing a file. Michael stood to her right, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Gladys blinked. What is this?" she asked, her voice unsteady. Alex's eyes widened as he stammered, "Rose?" She didn't rise. She simply looked up, calm and precise. "Good morning, Alex. Gladys," Michael spoke next. "Chief Madison will now be overseeing all merger activity, effective last week." The silence that followed was deafening. Alex's lips parted, but no words came out. Gladys took a step forward. "There must be some mistake." Rose closed the file with deliberate care and stood. "There's no mistake. You voted me out, but I was never removed. I was promoted." She stepped closer to Alex, eyes steady. "That vote didn't strip me of power. It revealed who you really are." She turned to Gladys. "And you? You've always wanted my place. Well, now I'm in a seat you never knew existed." Gladys swallowed hard, her facade crumbling. "You can't just," Michael cut her off. "Her authority is final. All previous approvals under your division are under review, effective immediately." Alex looked to Rose, finally speaking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Her reply was like a blade cloaked in silk. "Because I needed to know what you'd do when you thought I was gone." She turned back to her seat as Michael dismissed the meeting. As Alex and Gladys exited in silence, Rose sat back down, eyes on her screen. Her power wasn't loud. It was composed, earned, and deeply rooted. And now she wasn't just back, she was above them. The fallout began before noon. By mid-morning, an internal memo had quietly circulated through executive emails. "All merger approvals pending suspension review. Please await further instruction from the Office of Corporate Integrity." Phones buzzed, Slack channels exploded. But the real blow came just before lunch. Alex was called into HR. He sat across from Nancy, the HR director, who held a manila folder thick with printed emails, contracts, and flagged inconsistencies. "We have concerns, Mr. Madison," she said, her tone flat, "regarding your recent role in the onboarding of vendors and authorization of incomplete proposals. Until these matters are cleared, you are hereby placed on administrative leave." Alex stared at her, blinking. "Is this a joke? I didn't do anything unethical." Nancy didn't flinch. "That's for the audit committee to determine." When he rose in protest, she slid a printed document across the table, an approval he had signed just 2 weeks ago, traced back to a flagged vendor. It was irrefutable. Meanwhile, Gladys's office was no longer hers. Her badge had already been deactivated, and by the time she arrived to confront the situation, her desk had been cleared. Michael met her outside, his voice calm. "You've been terminated. The board was briefed this morning." She scoffed. "You're siding with her, after all I've delivered?" Michael raised an eyebrow. "You delivered shortcuts, cover-ups, and mismanagement. She delivered the truth, and a functioning system." As security escorted her out, Gladys muttered, "This isn't over." Rose, from her quiet office, received updates in real time. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She simply noted each change on her report. When she stepped out for a meeting later that afternoon, she passed by Alex's empty desk. It was surreal. Just weeks ago, he had strutted down that hallway with confidence. Now his chair sat pushed in, cold and untouched. The man she had once lifted with every ounce of her being had signed himself out with the same pen she placed in his hand. And all she did was let the truth speak louder than revenge ever could. Within days, a quiet shift swept through Miles and Cole. Departments whispered less about Rose and more about what had been hidden under the former leadership. Junior staff shared how their ideas had been dismissed or stolen. Middle managers, previously silent, began reporting how Gladys had rerouted credit for completed projects. And as the audit results were slowly released, names, dates, signatures, one name kept reappearing for the right reasons: Rose Madison. In a regional team meeting, Paul Adekunle cleared his throat and said, "It's time we admit something. Everything we've been lauding the past 6 months. Rose had her hands in it long before the board even noticed." Others nodded, some in shame, some in relief. Even Madison Ease, who had once stayed neutral, added quietly, "She didn't just keep the wheels turning, she kept the company from falling apart." Meanwhile, emails poured into Rose's inbox. Former interns, entry-level staff, and even rival executives sent messages ranging from apologies to admiration. One read, "Thank you for showing us what integrity looks like." Another, "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner." Rose read them all, but she didn't reply. Her focus was now on rebuilding the broken systems she had inherited. She restructured vendor relationships, initiated new ethics compliance training, and launched a leadership pipeline based on merit. No favoritism, no backdoor deals, just fairness. One afternoon, Paul walked into her office and said, "They're starting to realize who you've always been." Rose glanced up. "Let them. I'm not here for applause. I'm here to fix what they nearly destroyed." He nodded, then added, "You've become what they feared you would be, indispensable." As he left, she turned to her window. For the first time in months, she felt seen, not because of titles or scandals, but because the truth had finally found its voice, and it spoke through her work, louder than any rumor ever could. Alex stood outside the house he once called home, staring at the familiar door. After weeks of silence and formal emails, he finally texted, "We need to talk." Rose replied with a time and nothing else. Now, he stood in the living room, the weight of consequences etched into his face. "I made mistakes," he began, voice quieter than she'd ever heard it. "I let people get in my head, I thought. I thought you were holding me back." Rose didn't speak right away. She motioned for him to sit, then slid an envelope across the table. "I had the papers drawn up 3 days ago," she said. "Separation, nothing dramatic, just necessary." Alex looked stunned. "You're ending it?" She met his eyes calmly. "I'm ending the version of us where I fight for someone who won't fight beside me. The man I loved would have never watched me fall and called it growth." He swallowed hard. "You were always 10 steps ahead. I thought I needed to catch up. I didn't realize I was losing you in the process." Her voice softened but didn't waver. "You didn't lose me, Alex. You gave me away. And now, I'm just returning what's left of the rope I kept tying between us, hoping you'd grab it." He stared at the papers, then back at her. "Can we ever fix this?" She stood, walked toward the door, and opened it gently. "I forgave you already, but I'm no longer holding the door open for someone who walked out while I was still standing inside." As Alex stepped outside, the air felt heavier. He turned once to look back, but the door had already closed. Behind it stood a woman who had once carried him like a crown, and now walked alone with more power than she ever did at his side. Days after her termination, Gladys resurfaced, not within the company, but in the private circles of external investors. She had been laying a second track long before the internal collapse, leveraging Alex's access to sensitive data and Percy's pipeline into procurement decisions to court silent partners. Rose sat at her desk, reviewing a confidential third-party report when the pieces began falling into place. One vendor, Silverstream Logistics, had been mysteriously granted multiple contracts with no competitive bidding process. Their affiliation? A quiet shell investment tied back to Gladys and one Lucas Kareem, a lesser-known name on Alex's friends from business school list. Rose stood, walked into Michael's office, and placed the file before him. She didn't just undermine internal policy, she positioned herself to funnel revenue out of the company before we even knew we were bleeding. Michael exhaled deeply, tapping the folder. So she was always playing a longer game. Rose nodded, and Alex was just her tool. She used him until he had nothing left to offer. Meanwhile, Alex, still reeling from the suspension and separation, was beginning to feel the burn of abandonment. He called Gladys that afternoon, his first call since the blow-up. I just need to understand, he said. Was any of it real? Us? The partnership? Her reply was swift. Alex, it was strategic. You wanted power, and I needed access. Don't confuse utility for affection. He froze. So I was a pawn? She laughed lightly. Don't flatter yourself. You were convenient. The call ended with a click that echoed louder than any argument ever could. Alone, Alex sat in the silence of a small studio apartment he'd rented after leaving Rose's home, holding on to memories that now tasted bitter. He wasn't just betrayed, he'd been discarded by the very person he thought elevated him. And in that moment, he realized he had lost more than a job, or a woman, or a title. He had lost himself in the pursuit of validation from people who never intended to value him beyond his usefulness. The boardroom was filled with faces, old and new, awaiting the keynote address for the annual leadership forum. Rose stood near the entrance, clipboard in hand, dressed in ivory, her poise unwavering. Michael approached. You ready? She gave a small smile, more than I've ever been. When she walked to the podium, the room stilled. Her presence was no longer questioned. It was respected. She opened her remarks with measured grace. Leadership isn't proven by title or applause. It's tested in silence, when no one's watching, when decisions cost more than they reward. And still we lead. The room listened, captivated. She spoke not about revenge or what had been taken, but about restoration, ethical leadership, and what it meant to build something worth leaving behind. Her voice wasn't angry, it was resolute. Her words weren't about the fall of others, they were about the rise that came after you refused to stay buried. Afterward, a young woman approached her, an intern from the strategy unit. I just wanted to say, you make me believe I can lead with integrity. You make it look possible. Rose smiled, resting a hand briefly on her shoulder. Don't ever let anyone tell you power has to come from betrayal. Build it brick by brick. Make them remember you for how you stood when it cost the most. As the room slowly emptied, she stood near the large window overlooking the city skyline. From here, everything looked different, clearer, lighter. Not because she had won, but because she had survived and transformed. She had once believed that love meant sacrificing herself. Now she understood that real love for self and purpose never demands that kind of burial. She picked up her notes and walked out, not to prove anything, but simply because she could. Not as a wife betrayed, not as a leader rejected, but as the woman who rose above it all, quietly, powerfully, and on her own terms. Here's the Bible verse, Genesis 50, verse 20 ESV. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive, as they are today. Moral of the story. Betrayal may strike from the closest hands, but purpose often hides within the pain. Sometimes, being pushed out is the very path that positions you for greater elevation. What others intend for your downfall, God can use to redirect your destiny. True strength is revealed not in retaliation, but in the quiet rise that follows heartbreak. Let the wrong done to you become the ground beneath your rise, not the weight that holds you down.